Good morning. Welcome to Family Worship Center Online. We're glad to have you with us today. This first Sunday of the new year, January the 3rd. And we're excited about what this year has to hold. And if you're anything like me, it's got to be better than last year. Just hang in there. It's going to get better. And I wanted to let you know that we will be having our service live next week on the 10th of January at 10 in the morning. And I want to encourage you in your giving. If you haven't given lately, let me talk to you a little bit about how you can give. You can go online to our website, fwcerie.com, and there's on the main page, there's a giving button. Just hit that. And it'll walk you right through how you can set up your giving online. Actually, that's how I give all of my giving to all the different places I donate to. And it's real easy. And you can do it recurring, you can do it one time, so you can take advantage of that. Secondly, you can mail it to the church at 1201 Parade Street, Erie, Pennsylvania, 16503, and we can process it here. And also, there's a real easy way to do it on your phone. You download the Easy Tithe app, and it kind of walks you through it just like you would on your laptop or your personal computer. So it's real simple. Just download that. And want to encourage you to be generous. It's funny because the way Scripture teaches us is that we should never be up and down in our giving. It should just kind of be this flat line, and then every once in a while it goes up. Not, I don't do anything for a long time, and then I do something. So be that steady person. Scripture is very clear on tithing. It says if you tithe, God will bless you. Think about this. God will bless you like you've never experienced. I'll tell you a quick occurrence in our life. When my kids were little, they were, I think, 5 and 3, and we hadn't had our youngest yet. We were building our first church building, and so we were doing a capital campaign, or in the real world they call it a fundraiser, and we were going to give in this big offering. Well, I was not a rich man, and I really didn't have a lot of money in a savings account. We were living week to week. And so I was praying about what I should give. And I felt like God said, I want you to give $500. And I'm like, I don't have $500. He's like, yes, you do. I'm like, no, I don't. I know how much money I have. He goes, yeah, you do. You have $500. Get Susan's stock from when she worked for DuPont and go cash it in. You'll have $500. And I'm like, okay, first off, I don't know where that is, but I'll try and find it. Second off, I don't know how to sell stock. So, and I just felt like I should go to the bank. So I get the stock sheet, and I don't know how many shares we had, but I went down to the bank, and I took it to the lady, and I said, how do you get the money from this? And she goes, we can do it for you. I said, you can? She goes, yeah, but why do you want to do this? Keep this. This is really good stock. And I said, well, I feel like I'm supposed to give it to our building project. It's a real small town. We're building up the street. She goes, well, you're a better person than me. I sure hope God blesses you. And I said, well, I hope he does too, because it's kind of all I have. And so she cashed it in. It's right around a little over $500. Now, the funny thing is, when God spoke to my heart about giving that, I said, you know what, God, that's kind of the money for kids' college. That we're saving up, and, I don't know what it'll be worth 10, 15 years from now, but please, God, please, make sure my kids get to college, and make sure it gets paid for. And I didn't really think that much of it. Fast forward, guys, okay? Fast forward 12 years and 14 years later. My kids are applying to college. My oldest applies to, or wanted to apply to several different schools, but got recruited to wrestle at Harvard University in Boston, which at that time was $42,000 a year. And I had very little of that. And lo and behold, long story short, he gets in. And so they send us the bill. And I won't go into all the details of the billing, but his first year, when it was $42,000, we paid $8,000. So they gave him $34,000. And every year thereafter, we paid right around $7,000 to $8,000 for him to go to Harvard University. So they gave us probably $130,000 in scholarships, okay? My second child, Aaron, went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is an Ivy League school in Philadelphia. It cost the same exact amount of money as Harvard. And when she got there, it was like $50,000. So I'm paying $50,000 for one and $50,000 for the other, and I'm still only paying $8,000 for Brandon. They do her scholarship, and they give her about $35,000 a year. So she got about $140,000 in scholarships. We figured it out. That $500 investment when the kids were young grew into $250,000 of college scholarship money. Now, I just got to tell you, I've always said to myself, I'm going to be generous. Because over the long haul, I got to be honest with you, man, life has been great. And Sue and I have loved the life that God has called us to. So that's just an encouraging story on your giving. I'm not asking you for any money. I'm asking you to do this. Be a generous person and be consistent, and you'll be glad you were. I have a very exciting announcement I want to make. As all of you are well aware by now, I've been kind of the long-term substitute pastor for Family Worship Center for the past several months, both in person and online, and it's been a wonderful experience. But I've got a great announcement from our board to let you know that we are going to be having a candidate who could be the next pastor here at Family Worship Center. The exciting news is this. Candidate Daniel Burke will be our guest speaker on Sunday, January 10th at 10 a.m. It's live here in the sanctuary. And he's bringing with him his wife Tanya, their little girl Nora, and they're going to have the service that day. And then after the service, we're going to have our annual business meeting, as well as an opportunity for you to vote on whether Daniel could be the next pastor here at Family Worship Center. And you probably have received a letter in the mail. If you haven't, you probably will tomorrow or Tuesday. Read it over. It has all the particulars in it. And we're excited to bring Daniel here and have him be our candidate. That we've looked forward to this. We've worked hard on it. This has actually been a process that's taken about 5 months of communicating and meeting. And so the board has done a phenomenal job and a thorough job in settling on Daniel Burke as our candidate. So come and join us 2 weeks from today here at Family Worship Center. Service is at 10 a.m. And we look forward to this wonderful opportunity that God has allowed us to come across and prepare for. Almost a year ago, we were all doing our thing, going about life normally. And I get this phone call from a friend of mine from high school, and we do talk on a regular basis, so it wasn't totally out of the blue. And he said, "Steve, I want to tell you something." I said, "Okay." He said, "Our world is about to change." And I'm thinking, has he gone off the deep end? And he said, "I have someone close to me who works for the CDC. And there is a virus that is going to be coming and hitting not just the United States, the whole world. And it's going to change life as we know it." Now, I got to be real frank with you. In my brain, I'm going, that baloney. And he said, I can't tell you anything else I know, but I know this. Just be prepared. He said, go buy some food, store it up in your basement. I wish he'd have said buy toilet paper, but he didn't. He said, go buy some food, make sure you have it. But I just kind of sloughed it off. This was like February, maybe beginning of February. And the news started talking about this COVID-19, coronavirus. And everyone's kind of going, what? And lo and behold, it hit. And you guys know as well as I do, life was not the same. We got shut down. Everybody had to stay home. I remember the day I heard, I went and just bought a bunch of food and then went home and looked at Susan and said, what do we do? What do we do with ourselves? We can't go anywhere. We can't do anything. And listen, you all, I'm sure you agree, what do you do with this? It's never happened before. And we were all in for a hard time, a real hard time. And we had to isolate. Now we're dealing with how do you get this thing? Do you wear a mask? You don't wear a mask. You remember how everything just turned on a dime. Now look back now. It was like March 17th, I think, when the edict came down. We have got to shelter. Now we're in January of 2021, and we're still dealing with it, but we dealt with it. We coped with it. Does that make sense? We coped with this issue. So I thought about a good message of encouragement for all of us is that as weird, I use the word weird, as weird as it is to have to put on a mask, to isolate, to stay 6 feet apart, as odd as that is for our culture, it's almost become normalized now, we coped with it. We found a way to cope. And so today's message is how to cope with hard times. And I want to read a paragraph. I don't normally read, but I want to read this to you because it's very helpful. It says, though some people stay mercifully free from acute physical pain, everyone has a form of suffering that will not go away. A personal flaw, a broken relationship, an unhealed childhood memory, a suffocating guilt. To understand suffering, we must step away from the microscope with its array of nerve cells obediently responding to stimuli, and look full into the face of agonized human beings. The question today is no longer, where is God when it hurts? It has now become, where is God when it won't stop hurting? How can God allow such intense, unfair frustration? Today we're going to tackle a real-life story from a real-life guy who asked God this question: where is God when it won't stop hurting? For insight into this cesspool of pain, let's turn to the life of a man we all respect. He's a man's man. He probably got a tattoo right here. He probably tucks his cigarettes. No, he didn't smoke. But he's a tough guy. He's a real guy. Probably wears a strapless t-shirt. Just kidding. He's a real man's man. He was a leader, a writer, a pastor, an evangelist, a prophet, an administrative genius, and someone who still speaks firmly into the fiber of men's souls today. His name was Paul. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 through 10, he writes this. Now listen close, because this is a really interesting text. He said, I must go on boasting. Although there is nothing to be gained by boasting, I will go on to my visions, my revelation from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up into the third heaven. Whether it was in his body or out of his body, I don't know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations that I have had. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with God, please take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that God's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, and we could add, in pandemics. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Guys, I got to be honest with you. That is one of the most powerful, writings in the Bible to me, about a man that is normal just like we are. But he had this incredible experience in the midst of having what's called a thorn in the flesh. We'll deal with that later. The opening verse of this portion of Scripture reads like a self-portrait of a self-absorbed, conceited, super-spiritual egotist. Paul said, you know what, I could brag. Matter of fact, later on, previously in the book of 1 Corinthians, he talks about all the things that he had done. You know, I was this, I was that, I was this, I was that. If someone did that today, if someone came into this church that I'm sitting in this morning and went to preach and say, let me tell you what I've done. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. We'd all be sitting there going, well, bully for you, you conceited egotist. Because we don't like people that brag about themselves. We see that as a negative. And Paul says, I see it as a negative too, but let me tell you something. The things I've been through have served for me to be able to talk to you about serving God in every circumstance. So I guess I'm like you, because we're probably a lot alike. I don't like people that brag. I don't like people that, they tell their story and everything you tell them, they play bigger, better, more. You ever play that game, bigger, better, more? I did something bigger, I did something better, I did something more. We don't like those kind of conversations, and we really don't enjoy being around those kind of people. Well, if you knew the man, you would understand right where he's coming from. This leads me to a sound relationship principle regarding the judgment of a man's character. If you don't know a man, you will judge him by his words. And let me explain. If you don't know somebody and you're in the mall and they say something, you're going to say, man, that person's mean. And they may not be mean, but all you heard was their words. But if you do know a man, and you see him in the mall, and he says something that's a little bit mean, you will judge the words by the man and say, boy, something must have happened because he's a good guy, and he doesn't normally talk like that. So in this case, we know the man, so we're going to judge the words by the man. He's not conceited. He's not an egotist. In case we judge him the wrong way, listen close. He is sharing from his heart, saying, I'm not boasting. I could, and so could all of us. We've all done something that we could boast about. For most people, boasting is a real turnoff. But he's implying that some boasting is what we call horizontal. And there is a time to boast. Let me just give you a biblical principle. There's a time to boast. And let me tell you when it is. Well, it's when you're interviewing for a job. And the person interviewing you says, are you good with Microsoft? Well, in your brain, you could say, yeah, man, I'm a whiz. I know what Command A is, which I think is a copy. I'm not sure. But you know, and you tell the guy, you're not conceited. You say, yeah, I know it well. I'm an expert at it. I've had X courses on it. I took computer science. And he says, wow, that's important. How about Excel? Do you know Excel? Yes, I do. I can do spreadsheets. I can do it in finance. I can do it in derivatives. I'm great with Excel. Wow, great. If you don't do that, you're not going to get the job. And that's not being conceited, it's being confident. And I look at this and say, let's really understand that Paul was saying, gang, all these wonderful things happened, but I still had this thing stuck in my flesh. What if God said to you, when you say to him, God, I can't take this anymore. What if he said, God, I've done all this for you. I've been faithful. I've been a tither. I've lived right. I've tried not to be a corrupt person. And you go through your list of all the good things you've done. And then you say, God, will you just take this thing away? Will you please take it away? And what if God said to you this? Live with it. I don't want to hear that. Come on, a good God would take this away. What if God said, live with it? Really? What if God said, that situation you've been asking me to change? What if God said, you're just going to have to live with it? Well, the 12th chapter of 2 Corinthians leads us to a comfort zone that many would just as soon wipe out of their life. Unfortunately, guys, real life tells us sometimes it is God's will that we just live with it. That philosophy sounds cold to me. It's hard to accept that some people just have to live with pain. It would seem most difficult to accept that the struggle is going to keep hanging around. So today I want to talk to you about how to cope when you're going through hard times. The first thing the Apostle Paul did is he relived his past victories. Now, if you serve Jesus long enough, you're going to get some victories, guys. Paul sets the stage for a learning to live with it by first showing that God had honored him with what we call a glimpse of his glory. God honored Paul by this heavenly experience. And he says, guys, before I tell you about this thing I'm stuck with, let me tell you that while I had it, I kind of had this road trip to heaven. Whether I was in the flesh or I was in the spirit, I don't know. This is pretty mysterious stuff, right? He says, I got to go to heaven. I heard things that are inexpressible. Holy cow, I get goosebumps thinking about it. Who gets to do that? And he said, 14 years ago, I had an epiphany, a meeting with God. Personally, it was wonderful. It was incredible. I went to heaven, the third heaven. It was, so did you catch the part where he said, 14 years ago? 14 years ago, he's just now telling us? Think about that for a minute. How many of you, if you got a trip to heaven last night, would hold it for 14 years? No, I don't think so. I think you'd be telling everybody, hey, what if you won an Olympic gold medal? Would you come home and hide it for 14 years? No, you'd come home and say, hey, you want to see it? You want to touch it? You want to bite it? Because do you hold stuff like that? Humble people do. Paul held that for 14 years. On 8 different occasions that we have recorded, God made himself known in a supernatural way to Paul. Paul saw the glorified Christ on the day of his conversion. He saw a vision of Ananias coming to visit him. Third, he had a vision from God when he was called to minister to the Gentiles. Fourth, during his ministry, he had visions from God to guide him and encourage him. 5, It was by a vision that he was called to Macedonia. 6, when the ministry was difficult in Corinth, God encouraged Paul by a vision. Number 7, after his arrest in Jerusalem, Paul was again encouraged by a vision from God. And number 8, an angel appeared to him in the midst of the storm and assured him that he and the passengers would be saved in the book of Ephesians. Along with these special visions that related to his call and ministry, spiritual revelations of divine truth were also communicated. This guy walked with God. You know, I'd like to think that I had 8. I kind of wish I had 8 visions and that God had visited me personally like that. I don't have any of those stories to tell you. This is a man who was tight with God, close to God. And that's a powerful testimony. God honored Paul by taking him to heaven and then sending him back again. So Paul had all these past victories to celebrate. Paul said, I've been to paradise, and I've seen what it looks like. I've heard what they're saying there. Now, I can't tell you what he heard or what they were saying, but I can tell you this. He said, it's inexpressible. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had only a few inexpressible moments in my life, and 3 of them were when my kids were born. And I saw these little babies, and I just didn't know what to say. I was so giddy. I remember holding my son, my firstborn, and the doctor handing him to me and saying, you've got a boy. And I just stood there in awe. I couldn't talk. And finally I looked at Susan and said, I think he looks like me. And he did. Have you had some of those moments where you're just in awe? And if God's given them to you spiritually, think about it. Because they're your victories. Has he healed you? Has he encouraged you? Has he provided for you? Has he given you more than you could ever have dreamed? Celebrate those victories. That's the first thing you do when you start to have hard times. When this COVID thing started, Sue and I, we've been married for, at that time, 41 years. Now it's 43. And so it's 42 at the time. And I said, you know, we love hanging out with each other. So it looks like that's what we're going to be doing. We bought a crock pot recipe book. We got one of those Instapot cookers. And we've eaten really good at home. And she worked for the bank, and she's never missed a day of work because she was essential personnel. And God just took care of us, and we've had time together that we would have never had. Guys, that's a good thing. So celebrate the victories. This last year's, it's not been a lot of fun, but I will tell you one of the great experiences I had was to be a part of Family Worship Center. I made new friends. I got to be a part of a congregation that was in a search to find a pastor. There's been some really cool victories in my life, and I'm going to celebrate them in hard times. Secondly, when you're going through a hard time, remain humble in your present pain. And this is where we start talking about this thorn. The Apostle Paul is very clear, and he said, look, there's a thing that can happen to you that it's like oil and water. You can't be a Christian and be conceited. Does that make sense? You can't be a Christian and be conceited. And so Paul said, I know I have all these big victories, but to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassing great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me. In other words, after the glory came the pain. One great leader has said the first step in being humble is to remember that what got you there won't keep you there. Let me explain. Paul had all these wonderful revelations, And there must have been something in him, because you remember, Paul used to kill Christians. He hated Christians. And he would go from town to town and have them massacred. And now all of a sudden, he becomes a Christian and he knows God intimately, and God gives him these wonderful experiences. Now think about it for a minute. Paul very well could have had a tendency to be an arrogant, conceited person. And Paul said, to keep me from being conceited, God gave me a thorn in the flesh to keep me humble in my present difficulties. Okay, let's talk about the thorn. The thorn, however, was far more than a protrusion from a stem of a rose that you prick your finger on. The word thorn means a sharp stake used for torturing or impaling someone. Kind of gross, huh? Paul was not describing walking through your backyard and getting caught on the rose bush. He was talking about something searing and intense. So just what was this thorn? Well, how about a little speculation? First, let's look at the views of great men that have held the following views in the face of evidence that we're going to have to just say no to. The thorn has been taken to mean spiritual temptations, a temptation to doubt or a temptation to shirk your duties in life. John Calvin said that. That won't work. That's not a sharp stake used for torturing and impaling. Everybody has that. Secondly, it must have been taken to mean the opposition or persecution that he would face, the constant battle with those who would try to undo his work. That's what Martin Luther said. But guess what? That's not it. We all have that. We all face persecution. Still, another theory is that Paul suffered from eye trouble. And it's true. Paul said the Galatians would have plucked out their eyes so that they could give it to him so he could have good eyesight. Paul's sight problems were no secret. He stated at the end of Galatians' letter, he said, my handwriting's so large because I can barely read it. I have a sight problem. This view does not identify the thorn. So it wasn't his sight. By far the most likely thing, as William Barclay states, is Paul suffered from chronically recurrent attacks of a certain viral malarial fever, which was common on the coast of the Mediterranean. The natives in the country got it. One who has suffered from it describes the headaches that accompany it as being like a red-hot bar thrust through your forehead. Another speaks of the grindings, boring pain in one's temple like a dentist drill, the phantom wedge driven in between your jaw, and says that when the thing became acute, it reached the extreme point of human endurance. You could barely live with it. Well, the truth is, and I've got to be real honest with you, no one knows what the thorn was. We're going to have to leave it to that show they call Unsolved Mysteries. We don't know exactly what it was, but we know this: whatever it was, Paul identified it as a thorn in the flesh. And the only thing we could be assured of is it stunk. And it lasted, and it kept lasting. And Paul 3 times said, God, take this away. And some of you know what that feels like. There have been times in your life and you're saying, why am I stuck in this motorized chair? Why am I stuck with this crippled part of my body? God, take it away, take it away, take it away. And yet, you live with it. So, finally, I want to talk to you about something that really is important to all of us. And it may be hard to do. And Paul said, I'm going to remain faithful to the finish. When God permits suffering to come into our lives, there are several ways we can deal with it. Some people become bitter. They blame God for robbing them of freedom and pleasures. And I will tell you, bitterness, bitterness, here's how I view bitterness. There's a difference between anger and bitter. Anger is a legitimate feeling that you have when you go through something tough or unfair. Bitter is this. Bitter looks for a way to pay back and takes action, either through some type of manipulative act or some overt action that gets them back. So don't be bitter. Others just give up and fail to get any blessing out of the experience because they will not put any courage in the experience. And it just puts us in a position where we go, ugh, I didn't get anything out of that. What good was it? And I got to be honest with you, everything you've ever gone through that's been difficult, I turn them into stories. I write books about them. I look at these situations and go, yeah, it was tough, it was this, it was hard, it was this, it was that. But what'd you get out of it? It's like the man that was asked, how'd you like your heart attack? He goes, like my heart attack? What are you, crazy? I hated my heart attack. He goes, really? He goes, yeah, man, that's painful. It's scary. I almost died. And his friend looked at him and said, well, are you eating better? He goes, yeah. He goes, did you lose weight? He goes, yeah. Do you feel better? Yeah. Are you in shape? Yeah. Is everybody telling you how good you look? Yeah. He goes, so what do you think of your heart attack? That's a great question. There's two ways of looking at it. Don't give up. Don't get frustrated. Number 3, still others grit their teeth and put on a brave front, determined to endure the bitter end, and they'll never talk about it. Paul says, look, I have a thorn in the flesh. Those that know him well knew what it was. And he said, I have unfortunately had to live with it. It's not the thorn that is what mattered. What mattered is how Paul handled it. Paul became a humble servant. As we learn to endure, there are 7 things that God employs to teach us as his children. Number 1, by meeting our needs when we are helpless, he teaches us trust. By making us wait for what we need or want, he teaches us patience. By stretching us beyond the realm of the unfamiliar, he teaches us to have a vision. Number 4, by taking us through the consequences of wrong choices, he teaches us values. Number 5, by allowing us to fail and make terrible mistakes, he teaches us wisdom. Number 6, by sustaining pain and affliction, he teaches us humility. By involving us in the lives of difficult people, he teaches us unselfishness. Look at all the things you can learn having a burden or having a thorn in the flesh. I want to close with this. We all have our own little thorns in the flesh. Maybe they're not as searing and as sharp as the Apostle Paul. But we all need God's help when we're going through difficult times. There's a famous author and psychologist by the name of James Dobson. And he tells the story of his wife going out for the day, and he was left at home to watch his son. And there was a road crew working on the street in front of their house. And his son loved big trucks. He loved dump trucks. And so he said, I was working in my library and I'm working along, and all of a sudden I thought, where is he? He said, I looked all over the house and I couldn't find him. He said, I got that panicked feeling. Where is he? I went outside, I looked around, I could not find him. He said, I'm starting to panic. Finally, I go down to the construction site thinking, dear God, I don't even want to go down there. What if something terrible happened? He said, I walk down the construction site and I see my son hanging from the tailgate of a dump truck. And he's yelling at the top of his lungs, won't somebody help the boy? Won't somebody help the boy? Won't somebody help the boy? He said, I ran and grabbed him. And he said, I held him, tightened my arms with tears in my eyes. I said, why were you yelling that? He goes, because that's what Mommy always yells when I'm stuck somewhere. Won't somebody help the boy? Won't somebody help the boy? Listen, you may be hanging on to the tailgate of the dump truck with your thorn in the flesh. I want you to know something. Daddy's coming. He's got you. He's going to hug you with tears in his eyes. Listen, won't somebody help the boy? Absolutely. When you're going through hard times, keep coping. The Father's got you in his arms.